Your antiquated system isn't sustainable in today's financial landscape. Marcus Reed stood in my office doorway, tablet in hand, pronouncing the death sentence for the compliance tracking software I'd meticulously built and maintained for the past decade. We're transitioning to Finance Cloud Elite next month, the gold standard in the industry. The board has already approved the migration budget. I saved my work and looked up at him. Finance Cloud Elite. That's correct. They handle all the major financial institutions in New York. Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan, the Federal Reserve contractors. We'll be in good company. The irony wasn't lost on me. For 10 years, I had watched other financial institutions panic when their systems crashed during critical audits or regulatory filings. Now, we were joining that crowd. My system had never failed. Not once. During the Harrington merger, when we had to track 4.7 million transactions across 12 divisions in real time, my software handled it without a hiccup. During the SEC investigation last year, when the government demanded transaction-by-transaction records going back 3 years, my system generated the reports in under 20 minutes. "When do you need me to start the transition?" I asked. "We won't be needing a transition. Finance Cloud has their own implementation team. Your services will no longer be required after Friday." I nodded. Understood. He turned to leave, then paused. "Nothing personal, Elijah. This is just business evolution. You understand?" Of course. After he left, I sat in the quiet of my office. Through the window, downtown Boston stretched out below, all glass and steel reaching toward the harbor. I had built something here, something that worked, something that mattered. But I wasn't bitter. In this business, you learn that everything is temporary. Projects end. Systems get replaced. People move on. But I also knew something else. I knew how these cloud vendors operated. I knew their limitations, their failure points, their support structures. I had seen the aftermath when financial institutions switched to industry-standard solutions, the emergency calls at midnight, the lost data, the scrambling to recreate transaction records for regulatory deadlines. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the business cards I had printed 2 years ago but never used. Elijah Morgan, Financial Systems Consultant. Clean, simple, professional. I had always planned to go independent eventually. Perhaps the timing wasn't entirely my choice, but the destination remained the same. I came to Meridian Financial 10 years ago after the crash claimed my startup. My partner and I had built transaction monitoring software for small investment firms. But when the funding dried up, I needed steady work. Financial institutions were stable, conservative. They paid well and demanded results. My first week at Meridian, I watched 3 compliance officers lose an entire day of work when their legacy system corrupted a transaction file. The CEO, Sophia Meridian herself, asked if I could build something better. Something that won't fail when the regulators are breathing down our necks. I spent 6 months studying how financial compliance actually worked, not how the textbooks said it worked, but how it really operated under pressure. Late nights, impossible deadlines, constantly shifting regulatory requirements. I built the system around those realities: redundant backups, offline capability, intuitive interfaces that worked even when people were exhausted and stressed. The first major test came during the Davidson acquisition. 12 divisions, 4.7 million transactions, 8 months of compliance verification. My system tracked every penny, every trade, every communication. When the regulators questioned a $47 million transaction series, we provided itemized reports down to the second. They approved without further inquiry. Word spread. Other financial institutions tried to poach me. Software companies offered to license my code, but Sophia Meridian doubled my salary and gave me equity in the firm. "You're part of the family now," she said. Then Sophia retired last year. Her nephew took over as CEO, but the real power shifted to the new CTO, a Wharton Business School graduate named Marcus Reed, who had never worked at a financial institution before. He brought Silicon Valley thinking to a downtown Boston financial practice. Disruption, innovation, moving fast and breaking things. I noticed the changes slowly. My access to certain financial systems was restricted. My direct line to the CEO was replaced with scheduled quarterly meetings. New policies required all technology decisions to be approved by the CTO's office. When I requested budget for system improvements, the response was always the same. We're evaluating our technology stack holistically. Marcus hired consultants from BlackRock Analytics to audit our systems. They spent 3 weeks interviewing people and reviewing documentation. Their report, which I wasn't allowed to see, apparently recommended migrating to best-in-class cloud solutions. The writing was on the wall, but I thought we had more time. I thought Marcus would at least want to understand what my system actually did before scrapping it. I was wrong. Now, cleaning out my office on Friday afternoon, I realized that 10 years of institutional knowledge was walking out the door with me. The system would keep running for a few more weeks. But when Finance Cloud Elite took over, every custom workflow, every specialized report, every integration with the firm's other systems would disappear. They would learn soon enough what they had lost. The call came 4 weeks later while I was having coffee at a shop near my apartment. I had been using the time to update my resume and reach out to former colleagues. The consulting business was slowly taking shape, but I was in no hurry. My savings could carry me for months. Elijah, this is Sarah from Meridian Financial. Is this a good time? Sarah Jenkins was the head of compliance. Smart woman. Always treated the regulatory requirements with the respect they deserved. Of course. How are things? Not good. The new system. There are problems. Serious problems. I set down my coffee. What kind of problems? It lost all our transaction tracking for the Henderson portfolio. 3 years of work just gone. Marcus says it's a temporary database issue, but the federal audit starts Monday, and we need those transaction records for compliance. The Henderson portfolio, the institutional client that had been generating steady revenue for 5 years. The same client whose transactions my system had tracked, flawlessly. Have you contacted Finance Cloud support? We've been trying for 12 hours. They say they're working on it, but they can't give us a timeline. Marcus is, well, he's having a difficult day. I could imagine. In my system, this would have been a 10-minute fix, full backup restoration, verification, and testing. But Finance Cloud operated differently. Their support was outsourced to India. Their backup procedures were automated and opaque. When things went wrong, customers waited in line. Is there anything specific you need from me? Actually, yes. The board wants to know if you could help us as a consultant, just temporarily, until we get this sorted out. I paused. What about Marcus? Marcus is focused on working with Finance Cloud to resolve the technical issues. This would be a separate engagement. Regulatory compliance consulting. Regulatory compliance consulting. A polite way of saying they needed someone to clean up the mess. My consulting rate is $450 per hour. That should be fine. When can you start? I can be there in 30 minutes. After I hung up, I sat for a moment processing what had just happened. 4 weeks ago, they fired me to save money on an obsolete system. Now, they wanted to pay me nearly 4 times my old hourly wage to fix the problems caused by their cost-saving measure. But this was just the beginning. Henderson was a relatively simple portfolio. Wait until they tried to run quarterly compliance reporting. Wait until they faced their first full federal audit. Wait until they realized that my obsolete system had handled dozens of integrations and custom processes that Finance Cloud Elite couldn't replicate. I finished my coffee and walked to my car. Marcus Reed was about to get an expensive education in the difference between industry standard and actually working. My business cards were in the glove compartment. It was time to put them to use. When I arrived at Meridian Financial, the office felt different. The usual afternoon energy was replaced by a tense quiet. People huddled around computer screens, typing frantically, or speaking in hushed tones on phone calls. I recognized the atmosphere from my startup days. Crisis management mode. Sarah met me at reception. "Thank God you're here. It's worse than I thought." She led me to conference room C, where my old workstation had been set up. Someone had the foresight to preserve my development environment on a separate machine before the system migration. Smart move. "What's the current status?" I asked. "Finance Cloud says the data isn't lost, just temporarily inaccessible due to a synchronization error. They estimate 6 to 8 hours for full restoration, but we don't have 6 to 8 hours. The Federal Reserve auditors arrive Monday morning at 9 a.m., and if we don't have the Henderson records ready, they'll consider it a Regulation Z violation. That's a potential $75 million fine." I logged into my old system. Everything was exactly as I had left it 4 weeks ago. Complete transaction records for Henderson, detailed time tracking, compliance verification, regulatory cross-references, all of it intact and immediately accessible. "I can generate the reports the Fed needs in about 20 minutes, I said. "Do it." While the system compiled the data, I heard raised voices from down the hall. Through the conference room's glass walls, I could see Marcus Reed pacing in his office, phone pressed to his ear, gesturing emphatically at someone who wasn't there. The Henderson compliance report finished processing. 3 years of financial transactions, 1.7 million individual entries, $893 million in managed assets, all formatted according to Federal Reserve specifications. I printed 3 copies and handed them to Sarah. "This is incredible," she said, flipping through the pages. Finance Cloud told us it would take their forensics team 2 days just to identify where the data went. "Different architectures," I said. "My system stores everything locally with real-time cloud backup. Their system processes everything in the cloud first, then caches locally. When the cloud connection fails, everything downstream stops working." "Can you fix their system?" "I can't fix their system, but I can provide parallel data recovery for any portfolios that existed before the migration." Sarah nodded. "How much?" $450 per hour plus expenses." "Done." She left to deliver the reports, and I began assessing the scope of the problem. My old system contained complete historical data for 87 active portfolios, 123 closed portfolios, and approximately 22 million individual transaction entries going back 10 years. All of it was perfectly organized and immediately accessible. Finance Cloud Elite, meanwhile, had successfully migrated about 40% of the data before encountering what their technical support classified as unforeseen integration complexities. 20 minutes later, Marcus Reed appeared in the doorway. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Elijah, I heard you were helping with the Henderson situation." "Temporary consulting engagement," I said. "Regulatory compliance support." "Good. That's good. We appreciate you stepping in during this transition period." Transition period. As if this was a planned phase rather than a complete system failure. "How long until Finance Cloud has everything working normally?" I asked. "They're confident that full functionality will be restored within 48 hours. This is just typical migration turbulence, growing pains. Every major institution experiences this when upgrading to enterprise-class solutions." I nodded politely. Marcus clearly believed what he was saying, which made him either naive or a remarkably good actor. In my experience, when cloud vendors said 48 hours during a crisis, the real timeline was usually measured in weeks. "In the meantime," Trevor continued, Perhaps you could assist with a few other data recovery tasks, just to keep things running smoothly, while Finance Cloud completes their optimization process. Of course. What do you need? Quarterly compliance reports for all active portfolios, client transaction data for the past quarter. He paused, looking uncomfortable. The full regulatory audit package for the Federal Reserve visit. Full regulatory audit package. The most complex and sensitive data in the entire firm. The information that determined whether Meridian remained in compliance with federal banking regulations. If Finance Cloud had corrupted that data, Marcus wasn't just facing an operational crisis. He was facing a potential existential threat to the entire company. I can have preliminary reports ready by tomorrow morning, I said. Excellent. And Elijah, I appreciate your professionalism during this situation. I know the transition has been difficult for everyone. After he left, I opened my laptop and began documenting everything. Every request, every timeline, every promise Finance Cloud had made and broken. Marcus might think this was temporary turbulence, but I suspected we were just getting started. The regulatory compliance data told the complete story. I spent 6 hours that evening reconstructing the financial reports that Finance Cloud had somehow corrupted during their migration process. What I found was worse than a simple data loss. It was systematic incompetence. Finance Cloud had migrated the easy data first: client contact information, basic portfolio files, simple transaction entries. But they had completely failed to understand the complex relationships between different data types. Regulatory compliance requirements were calculated based on weighted formulas that considered transaction types, international exposure, timing factors, and risk profiles. My system had automated these calculations using custom algorithms developed over 10 years. Finance Cloud's system treated each data point as independent, destroying the mathematical relationships that made the calculations possible. Worse, they had apparently decided that some of my custom fields were non-standard and simply deleted them during migration. Years of carefully tracked metrics, regulatory verification scores, compliance complexity ratings, risk measurements, gone forever. I called Sarah at 9 p.m. How bad is the real situation? Bad. Finance Cloud pushed back their timeline again. Now they're saying 7 to 10 business days for complete restoration. Marcus is in emergency meetings with the CEO and the board. There's talk of bringing in forensic data recovery specialists. What about the Fed audit deadline? Your report saved us for Henderson, but they'll be examining all our Tier 1 portfolios. That's 27 portfolios we need complete reports for by Monday. I can generate those, but Marcus is telling everyone that Finance Cloud provided the Henderson data, isn't he? How did you know? Just a guess. Marcus was claiming credit for my work, while simultaneously dealing with the crisis his decision had created. Sarah, I need to ask you something confidential. Before the migration, did anyone from Finance Cloud actually test their system with our data? Not that I know of. They said their migration tools were proven with thousands of financial institutions. Did they send anyone here to understand our custom compliance workflows? They said everything would be handled remotely. I had suspected as much. Finance Cloud had sold Marcus a standard package and convinced him that our unique requirements would somehow fit their generic solution. It was like ordering a custom suit through a catalog. One more question. How much is Meridian paying Finance Cloud annually? I'm not supposed to know that, but I handle the invoice processing. $2.2 million per year, plus implementation costs. $2.2 million. My old salary was $175,000 plus benefits and equity. They were paying Finance Cloud 12 times what they paid me for a system that didn't work. Elijah, can I ask you something? Could your old system handle everything we're trying to do with Finance Cloud? It was handling everything for 10 years. Then why did Marcus replace it? That was the question I had been asking myself for weeks. Marcus wasn't stupid. His resume was impressive. Wharton Business School, consulting experience at top firms, successful technology implementations at previous companies. So why had he made such a catastrophic decision? The answer came to me while I was reviewing the Finance Cloud contract terms that Sarah had quietly shared. Marcus hadn't just bought software, he had bought a relationship. Finance Cloud was owned by Stratton Consulting, the same firm where Marcus had worked before joining Meridian. His former colleagues were now his vendors. It wasn't about technology. It was about Marcus proving that he could bring big firm solutions to a mid-sized financial institution. It was about demonstrating his value through expensive, visible changes rather than quiet, effective maintenance. My system worked too well. It was invisible, reliable, and boring. Marcus needed something that looked impressive in PowerPoint presentations to the board. Unfortunately for Marcus, the board cared more about passing federal audits than the impressive features that Finance Cloud promised, and those audit requirements were currently impossible to satisfy. Tomorrow, I would deliver the regulatory compliance reports that Finance Cloud couldn't provide. Marcus would have to explain to the board why their expensive new system couldn't handle the most basic function of financial institution management. My consulting rate was about to become a bargain. The next morning, I arrived at Meridian Financial with 27 sets of printed reports and a proposal that would change everything. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m., and I wanted to be ready. Sarah met me at the elevator. Marcus has been here since 5 a.m. Finance Cloud pushed back their timeline again. Now they're saying 3 weeks for full data recovery. The board members are furious. The Federal Reserve audit team arrives in 48 hours. What about the regulatory compliance requirements? That's why they need you. Finance Cloud says their system can't replicate your compliance formulas without significant custom development. They estimate 6 months and an additional $850,000 in consulting fees. 6 months. By then, Meridian would have failed multiple federal audits. In the financial industry, that was grounds for revoking banking licenses and appointing external management. Has anyone told the board that my system can generate those reports right now? That's why I called you yesterday. The chairman specifically requested that you attend the meeting. I had worked with the chairman, Robert Meridian, for 7 years before his sister retired. He was practical, decisive, and completely uninterested in technology for its own sake. He cared about results. At 10 a.m. sharp, I walked into the main boardroom carrying my laptop and the printed reports. 12 board members sat around the mahogany table with Marcus at the far end, looking like he was facing a firing squad. "Elijah," Robert said, standing to shake my hand. "Thank you for coming. We understand you've been helping us navigate some temporary technical difficulties. I'm happy to help however I can." Marcus cleared his throat. "Elijah has been providing excellent support during our migration to Finance Cloud Elite. The data recovery process has been more complex than anticipated, but we're confident that full functionality will be restored soon." "How soon?" asked Victoria Palmer, one of the founding board members. Finance Cloud estimates 3 weeks for complete system restoration. However, they can provide basic functionality immediately, and Elijah has been generating interim reports using archived data. "Interim reports," repeated another board member. "What exactly does that mean?" I set the printed regulatory compliance reports on the table. These are your complete Federal Reserve audit reports for all 27 Tier 1 portfolios, calculated using the same formulas that have been in place for 10 years. Every transaction, every risk assessment, every regulatory cross-reference. The data is complete and accurate. Robert picked up the reports and flipped through them. "This looks identical to what we received last quarter." "Because it is identical. Same system, same calculations, same data sources." But I thought your system was obsolete, said Victoria. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. The strategic decision to migrate to Finance Cloud was based on long-term scalability and integration capabilities. Marcus, Robert said quietly, help me understand something. You replaced a system that worked perfectly with a system that doesn't work at all. And now, we're paying Elijah 3 times his old salary to recreate the reports that his old system generated automatically. The migration challenges are temporary. Finance Cloud is an industry-leading solution used by major institutions across the country. Which major institutions? I asked. Marcus looked at me sharply. Excuse me. You mentioned that Finance Cloud handles all the major financial institutions in New York. Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan, Federal Reserve contractors. I'm curious which specific institutions use their compliance system. That information is proprietary. Actually, it's not. I opened my laptop and connected to the projector. Finance Cloud's client list is publicly available on their website. They serve 31 financial institutions nationwide. The largest has 75 employees. Meridian Financial has 870 employees. You're implementing a system designed for institutions less than 1/10 your size. The silence in the room was absolute. Robert Meridian leaned forward. Elijah, what would it cost to restore your original system as our primary platform? I had been waiting for this question for 4 weeks. I would need to evaluate the current state of the infrastructure, but I estimate 80 hours of restoration work at my consulting rate. After that, I would recommend a maintenance contract to prevent future disruptions. And your consulting rate is $450 per hour. Marcus's face had gone completely pale. The vote was unanimous. 12 board members, 12 hands raised in favor of terminating the Finance Cloud contract and restoring my original system. Marcus sat motionless as Robert Meridian read the resolution aloud. Effective immediately, Elijah Morgan is authorized to restore the firm's previous compliance and transaction management system. All data migration activities with Finance Cloud are suspended pending legal review of contract termination procedures. Victoria Palmer looked directly at Marcus. We will also be conducting a comprehensive review of all technology decisions made in the past year, including vendor selection processes and due diligence procedures. Marcus finally spoke. I believe this is a mistake. Finance Cloud is a proven solution. These migration issues are temporary. Marcus, Robert said, Finance Cloud has cost us 6 weeks of productivity, nearly compromised our Federal Reserve audit, and made it impossible to verify regulatory compliance. Elijah has solved every problem in less than 24 hours, using a system you declared obsolete. But the long-term scalability of a system that doesn't work is 0. I connected my laptop to the main server and began the restoration process. 10 years of development work, carefully preserved on backup drives, began flowing back into the firm's infrastructure. Database connections reestablished, custom workflows reactivated, integration points with accounting, transaction management, and regulatory systems came back online. How long will this take? Asked Robert. 6 hours for complete restoration, another 3 hours for testing and verification, and then we'll be fully operational. Better than fully operational. I've been developing improvements for 4 weeks. The restored system will be more efficient than what you had before. Marcus stood up abruptly. I need to make some calls regarding contract termination procedures. After he left, Victoria turned to me. Elijah, we owe you an apology. Letting Marcus eliminate your position was a serious error in judgment. I understand. Change is difficult to evaluate when you're not deeply familiar with the technical details. Would you consider returning as a permanent employee? I saved my work and looked around the boardroom. 4 weeks ago, I had been escorted out as an obsolete relic. Now they wanted me back as their savior. I appreciate the offer, but I think the consulting arrangement works better for everyone. You get guaranteed system reliability without the overhead of a full-time position. I get the flexibility to work with multiple clients. Multiple clients, Robert raised an eyebrow. 3 other financial institutions have contacted me this week. Word travels fast when banks have system failures. 6 months later, Meridian Financial settled their breach of contract lawsuit with Finance Cloud for $1.5 million. Marcus Reed resigned to pursue other opportunities, which turned out to be a lateral move to a smaller firm in Philadelphia. My consulting business had grown to include 15 financial institutions across Massachusetts and Connecticut. The demand for reliable custom-built systems was higher than I had expected. Apparently, many institutions had experienced their own Finance Cloud moments with various cloud providers. I was working from my home office when Robert Meridian called. "Elijah, I wanted to give you an update on the Federal Reserve audit. We just received the final report. Perfect compliance across all categories. The examiners specifically mentioned the quality and accessibility of our transaction tracking system." "That's excellent news." "There's something else. We're opening a second office in Providence. Would you be interested in building an integrated system for both locations?" "Absolutely. What's your timeline?" "We'd like to start planning next month. And Elijah, this time you'll be reporting directly to me. No intermediaries." After we hung up, I walked to the window of my home office. The harbor was clearly visible today. Blue water stretching to the horizon, dotted with white sails. I had built something that worked, something that mattered, something that lasted. My phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah. "New CTO started today. First thing she asked was whether you were available for a consultation on system architecture. I told her your rate is $750 per hour now." She didn't flinch. $750 per hour. Fair market value for expertise that couldn't be replaced by a catalog solution. I opened my laptop and began working on the Providence integration specifications. Some problems required custom solutions, built by people who understood the difference between working and working well. The market was finally catching up to that reality.